Hey guys, thanks for stopping by. So today I'm going to be reading and listening to the audiobook of this old classic, Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift. So I'm looking forward to that. Also, just so you know, this is on Audible if you guys have an account, and it's actually included. You don't even have to use a credit up for it. And it's narrated or performed by David Hyde Pierce. Remember Niles from Frasier? So that's pretty cool. Anyway, stick around. All right, everyone. So Gulliver's Travels is a really neat book so far. I'm only a few pages into it at the moment. What's really neat about the performance of David Hyde Pierce is, first of all, he's such an incredible actor, right? I mean, I really do think he is one of the best classical actors out there. And what's incredible about him is he not only employs the English in the book, which is like, I don't know, it was written in 1726, so it's like Elizabethan era to early modern English, I would suppose, right? And he, back then they would trill the R's and things like that, and he does such a good job of it in the whole bloody book. He keeps it up the whole way through, like, it's amazing. So he's such a great actor, and he's got such a great voice to listen to. But also just the writing of the book, the storyline is so absurd, and it was kind of a satire about human behavior, basically. So I'm really enjoying it so far. Okay, some of you may be asking, why Gulliver's Travels? And there's several reasons why I chose Gulliver's Travels. First of all, it's a classic. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but I'm trying to get through. I would like to knock off all of the classics at some point. I don't know when I'll be able to get around to all that literature. I'm slowly chugging my way through it. The second reason I've kind of already alluded to, it's included in your Audible membership, so you don't even have to spend a credit, and I'm cheap, so there's that. And David Hyde Pierce, he's awesome. I mentioned how much I like him, but I would say one of the main reasons why I chose this book is, if many of you know me, or following me from my other channel and stuff, I'm really into philosophy. I've read a lot of philosophical works. Anyway, this guy I had interviewed, well, it's now on my new channel, but I originally interviewed him on my other channel. His name is Stanley Fish, and he mentions this book quite a bit in our discussion. What we were talking about in, that whole conversation, it was about free speech and the First Amendment. He's a professor of law at Benjamin Cardozo University there in New York. We were talking about the nature of speech, not just in legal applications, but philosophically. He holds the view that speech creates the world. Excuse me. Don't get too mythical about this, or I should say metaphysical. Although there is a case to be made even for that words and speech have a metaphysical quality, a creative, performative aspect to them. But he says Gulliver's Travels raised some really interesting thought experiments. I suppose one of them was that Captain Gulliver happens across a world where the inhabitants are extremely suspect of language and the distortions that it creates, and how, you know, the boundaries between one concept and the next is extremely fluid, and that creates a lot of problems when people communicate with one another, and it creates realities that you can't even really know until they've come to fruition. So I found that really interesting, and he was talking about how they would have to carry around this backpack and pull out items that they're talking to, because they felt that language, unless it was directly referent to something physical, it was apt to be corrupted and distorted and highly abstracted. And so the way they got around that is that you carry this knapsack, and in order to convey thoughts, you directly refer to the items you pull out. And it just sparked a really, really interesting discussion between him and I about the kind of the ontology of language. And so ever since that conversation, even though I've heard many things about this book, that conversation really put this book high up in my to be read. You can watch that video. It was a whole, I don't know, it was well over an hour, this discussion I had with him, and we talked about, you know, the First Amendment and free speech and free speech doctrine, like the actual philosophy, legal philosophical theory behind it. It was a fascinating discussion. So if you want to watch that, I'll have a card or some link or something. This will give you a chuckle. Captain Gulliver, he happens across this really strange civilization made up of miniature men. I mean, they can all fit like in the palm of his hand. And they take him hostage and make something of an exhibition out of him. And I guess they conduct some sort of military parade where he, you know, stands with his legs apart and they march underneath him. Anyway, listen to this. This is really funny.
His Majesty gave orders upon pain of death that every soldier in his march should observe the strictest decency with regard to my person, which, however, could not prevent some of the younger officers from turning up their eyes as they passed under me. And to confess the truth, my breeches were at that time in so ill a condition that they afforded some opportunities for laughter and admiration.
I like that shit. That's funny. Gulliver's Travels really reminds me of Sinbad the Sailor. Remember Sinbad the Sailor from the Arabian Nights? It reads very much the same way. Of course, it's a little more fleshed out. You know, the worlds are better imagined and graphically told. And of course, it's much more fantastic and magical. But yeah, it really is giving me those kind of vibes. Now, what I love about Jonathan Swift so far is his satire. Like, this book is a satire about human nature. And the satire that he employs is extremely unique, at least compared to anything I've read. His satire can be so subtle, and yet it can be so in your face at other times. That's what's really neat. I would say he spends the first half of the book, you know, the first two worlds that he happens upon, are kind of just drawing attention to our relative position, certainly on this planet and even within our own cosmos, just our relative size to the rest of our environment, which he does this by placing the main character, Captain Gulliver, in a civilization full of people who are like 6 inches of his size, and then he goes into the next civilization, which is, it's inverted, where he would be relatively about 6 inches or smaller of that race's size. And you end up with, he spends a lot of time with focusing on the psychology that our relative size and our environment produces, and which is kind of a weird thing to focus on, right? But I think it's really neat, because the psychology that it produces, we have to maintain this modesty, almost bordering on insignificance, compared to the other aspects of humanity, which is, we're the most important thing in the cosmos, essentially. What do you call that? Not dichotomy, but that conflict in our psychology is ever present. You never really think about that, do you? When he is being sarcastic, and there's a level of sarcasm there, you can also, because you're so embedded in the story of that other civilization, that you're looking at it from their perspective, and you're seeing how what he's saying makes a certain amount of sense, as absurd as it is from the other perspective, or from the point of view of that other civilization, right? So it's he kind of comes to the defense of humanity, but then at the same time he's ridiculing it and being very critical of it. But then as you get kind of into the second, or the third quarter, I should say, of the book, he's focusing more on our intellectual faculties, and just the way that certain corners of our society construe ourselves, and the psychology that produces. For example, the academicians, if you will, the scientists, the philosopher, the mathematician, how they construe the world, and the psychology that produces, even though there's nothing wrong with those individual disciplines, taken to an extreme, you end up in an absurd position in your environment, where everything is kind of bitted, from the mathematical sort of engineer's perspective. Everything is bitted, and in these straight lines, and how we can't break out of that. Okay, that was intense, the way Gulliver's Travels ends up. Get that book, read it. He does quite a change towards the end of the book, and it reminds me of, and this is very odd, I realize that this comparison is way out from left field, but it very much reminds me of Obama's most recent memoir, A Promised Land, where he talks about his 10 years president, which is a very weird comparison, as I said. I know you're going to be like, what? But the cadence of the book is very similar. That's how I would say it. The feeling that it leaves you with all throughout, and how it progressively gets more caustic and more sour towards the frailties of human nature. It leaves you with very similar feelings. Why the two characters remind me so much of each other, that is Jonathan Swift writing as Captain Gulliver, and former President Obama, is they're both writing about their country, their homeland, their system of governance as just the apex, the ideal of what man can produce, and how society should be structured. So they both have this idealism that they start the book out with, and Gulliver holds that tone up until the fourth quarter. whereas Obama steadily loses it throughout his memoir. I mean, Obama still speaks very affectingly about, the United States Constitution and the way they, the American system. He is an idealist, and I respect that man a great deal. But by the end of his book, you end up with a similar kind of feeling, a kind of contempt bordering on anti-human antipathy for our shared nature. That it's just the end of the book leaves you just fucking sour grapes all the way, and not in a way that's unjustified, mind you. He convinces you into that position that there's no other way of characterizing humanity, even though we have some wonderful things about our nature. We're rational beings, and we're driven by an ideal, but in the end, man is utterly irredeemable. And not taking that in the Christian connotation of the word. In the most objective sense, man is irredeemable, and it should leave you with a contempt for our nature. And while I disagree with it, that as a starting point, when you look at how man governs himself, when you look at what we do as people, it's a very compelling point of view. Of course, it's completely existentially unsustainable, but it's very easy to make that argument. So I would say it's a very important piece of literature, and I'm very glad that I read this book, and I think that you guys should too. David Hyde Pierce does such an incredible job of reading this book on Audible, and yeah, just get this book, guys. It's you won't regret it. And with that, I would also recommend Obama's book. Anyway, that's my thoughts on Gulliver's Travels. It'll probably be somewhere between 4.5 and 5 stars. That's how much I liked it. Till next time, thanks for watching. Hey everyone, I hope you liked this video. If you want more like the one you just watched, click the suggested video on this screen. Make sure you subscribe, and to connect with me on my other platforms, my handles are linked below in the description, alright? Take care, peeps. Till next time.